Hi, I'm Keith Boswell. I'm the Vice President of Marketing here at ADHD Online. I'm joined today by Lindsay Guentzel. She is the podcast host of Refocused with Lindsay Guentzel. And we are really excited today, kicking off, really, you're the first guest in your own story.
Yeah, I guess, aren't I?
Yeah.
Is that it?
I think
is that what we're doing?
I think so.
It's very interesting. So when we think back on this idea to tell 31 stories in 31 days, I've been trying to figure out when it came to me. I know it was early July because I remember pitching it to you guys middle of July, and I think I said something like, this crazy idea, but I'm really excited about it. And what I love is every time I approach ADHD Online and the team of people we work with about an idea, everyone is like really gung-ho. And the great part about this is that it's been such a collaborative effort to not only figure out how we want to tell these stories, but to find people to talk to and to make sure that we are, finding a really diverse group of people. We are talking to people in their early teens all the way up to like their late 50s and 60s, this phase in life, mature adults, and they're kind of in this new routine of their own. And it's a very ADHD project. It's very much like, one podcast a week could have been just fine.
Right.
But it's a go big or go home. And for me, honestly, this is kind of my first ADHD Awareness Month. So I was diagnosed in January of 2021, but I don't think I even knew it was ADHD Awareness Month in October until like the last week. And to me, that's just a sign that we're not doing a good enough job talking about the awareness and the complexity of what this diagnosis is.
Yeah, and how many people are going through it.
Yes, and I mean, the numbers just keep rising, and that's honestly been the best part about this podcast is the people who reach out, who talk about hearing themselves and feeling connected. And it's truly kind of unreal. It's a little overwhelming at times, not because I don't understand where they're coming from.
Right.
But it's kind of that, it's the imposter syndrome for sure. It's very much the I'm not deserving of that praise. And it's just been really amazing to kind of see how people have connected with Refocused.
It's funny you say that. I mean, I think it's one of those things, when we talked about, we wanted to launch a podcast. And you were like, I wanted to launch a podcast. And we thought, what might we do? And we finally had it ready in May. And I remember nervously telling people we've launched, we have a podcast. And I think I hate to say it, but it's one of those things now where it's feels like everybody's got a podcast.
Oh, everyone does
right?
have a podcast.
So it doesn't seem that special anymore.
No,
it's not
it
like
doesn't.
bringing a cake or cookies and everyone's
excited. No,
excited.
it's not innovative. We're literally 10 years behind the game on this.
And so I was telling people, and it was always with bated breath, because it's what are they going to say? Will they listen? Will they care? And the great thing for me was all the feedback that came back that people were like, wow, this is really good and better than I expected. I mean, things that, you hope for, but you just don't know till you put it out there. So, let's talk a little bit about your diagnosis story. So I know you've shared it before in the podcast, but kind of give us the setup. What was going on that led to you thinking you might want to get tested for ADHD?
Yeah, it's really interesting. In episode 2, I shared my story, and I actually interviewed one of my older sisters. And in just that time, we're talking May to October, I've learned so much more about my own story. And so I actually think it is very interesting to be kind of coming back to it on October 1st, the first day of ADHD Awareness Month. I can look back in my phone and I have screenshots from 2020, actually with Danny Donovan. And there were screenshots of tweets she had sent out that I just connected with. And I screenshot them, I put them into my phone, and I don't think I ever really went back to them. And knowing what I know now about my ADHD, I'm combined type. But I think for me, the inattentive side of that, the comorbidities, the anxiety, the depression, started very, very young. I remember holding shame about stuff that happened in first grade, having a really hard time when I would get in trouble. And I say get in trouble, and that makes it sound like I got arrested or something. It was like, no, I like turned in a paper late, or the story that I love to tell, and it's kind of actually the perfect analogy for somebody who was ADHD combined type but was undiagnosed, was I had a really hard time figuring out a schedule or sticking to things. And of course, in late elementary school, middle school is when they started having, you would take your planner home and you had to have your parents sign it and show them. I never could remember. You know, we're talking the 90s. It wasn't like you had smartphones or watches to tell you like, hey, it's Thursday night, grab your planner. It was one of those things like you had to have your own routine. Get the planner, set the bag out, all of those things. And that was not happening in my life. And I was so afraid of getting in trouble for not having my planner signed that I forged my mom's signature. Now here's where the ADHD combined type, like the very confident 5th grader who thought that she could match Karen Guentzel's perfect handwriting, like her immaculate cursive. Like I went into that classroom thinking like,
Done deal.
Done deal.
Yeah.
No, not at all. Mrs. O'Neill was a very good teacher because she did not buy it for a second. And you want to know what's so funny is that I still run into Mrs. O'Neill when I go home to visit my mom. And I don't know if she knows this, but like I have held shame. I get emotional saying this. I held shame for so long for something that every kid does.
Right.
Every kid gets in trouble. Every kid thinks that they're smarter than the teacher. And I'm sure Mrs. O'Neill, like maybe she remembers it because it was like a surprising thing for me to do, but I don't think that she's holding this grudge against me but that's how it plays out in your brain.
Those things hold in your head in ways it's really hard for others to understand.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I can see it at a very early age, and I was very good at school. I was not great at homework. It was those things of setting up my own routine. You know, I can look at really when the wheels fell off in college. I didn't even like know what program I wanted to study or what school I wanted to apply to. And there's so much grief with that because college for me was a really amazing experience. It's when I met my closest friends, you know, all of the things that I got to do, but I never got to really dive into figuring out who I was. And what's great about college is that that's the time to do it. You get to look into random programs and take classes that interest you. And I was just, there were so many things happening. And I even remember like, I needed a part-time job, and like a much easier route would have been getting a campus job. But I didn't go that route. I got a nannying job where I had to be in this house at like 6:30 in the morning. It was not a good fit, but on the inattentive side, I didn't know how to say that. Right. And so I faked mono. It's like so embarrassing. So embarrassing, but it was such a bad fit, and my only way out was like, okay, how do I get out of here without having to tell them that this isn't a good fit? Right. I was just very always on edge about disappointing people. And so, you know, it
And are you playing out all the what ifs in your head?
Oh, all the time. All the time. Which is why, and I've said this numerous times, this partnership with ADHD Online has been such a gift because you guys have welcomed me with open arms, and we're like learning this as we go. And it became very clear that I could come to you with all of the hiccups and all of the issues, and I didn't have that fear. I mean, maybe the first time, like getting it out, but the growth that I've seen just from my diagnosis to now and with this podcast, you know, somebody asked me the other day about how I view my life with ADHD, and honestly, the last year and a half is the happiest I've ever been, because I think once you realize, I was lucky I got to have that aha moment with medication. You know, I'm very happy with my medication right now, with my treatment plan, knock on wood, because it's very likely that that could change. I have a great therapist. I am working on establishing better boundaries, not only with work. You know, as a freelancer, I have so many different relationships, but really instead of just saying yes to everything, only saying yes to the things I want to do, it's that people pleaser in me. But on the other side of things, it's like, the day I took the medication, it was like oh, this is how I'm supposed to be feeling. This is how my brain is supposed to feel. Like, I used to joke that I was a night owl, and it's like, no, I think I'm actually kind of a morning person. But I'm a morning person when my ADHD is being managed.
Right.
And I'm lucky because I get this next chapter. Like, the next 10, 20, 30 years are going to be incredible. And I'm working on letting go of the rest of it. And it's hard.
Well,
It is very hard.
It is hard because that's the piece where we talk about this often, the what ifs, right? And I mean, not just the what ifs that you can run through in day to day, but the what if I had known sooner? What if I had,
Right.
you know, yeah.
Yeah,
So how do you? I know it's an active thing, but how are you with that now?
I have days. I still really struggle when I see people doing what I thought I wanted to be doing, and the jealousy kind of roars its ugly head. And I also think I came from this generation of you can be whatever you want to be. What do you want to be when you grow up? Yes, you can be that. And I think there was this expectation. It wasn't like it was ever said, but it was like, oh, yeah, no, you're going to do that in your 20s. And then you're like, you get to your 20s and you're looking around and you're like, this isn't what I was promised. And so it kind of goes back to even the conversation with like a treatment plan. Like, we know what we're supposed to do, but we aren't given a timeline for that. And I think it's really hard, not just for people who are neurodivergent, but for everyone to like dive into something without knowing like, yes, this is exactly how long it's going to take me. And it's with everything. I mean, like training for a race or redoing your basement. You know, we give ourselves these deadlines that have no real basis in truth.
Right, they're arbitrary.
And then to go off of somebody with ADHD, we have time blindness. So it's hard. It's really hard. But I do think, and it sounds cliche and you know, it makes me feel a little bit like, you know, I'm selling something online late at night and I'm asking you to call like a 1-800 number, but I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And so everything that led to this point got me here, whether it was jobs that I left or quit because I didn't feel like I was a part of the team, which we know is a big part of the inattentive side of ADHD, the rejection and the rumination and the fear of not belonging. And it's all of the mistakes, you know, it's fixing some of the things I did in my past, mostly with money, because we didn't know better and we didn't know what we were doing, which was feeding our brain with dopamine. And so I know I'm where I'm supposed to be. And that is really, really powerful. And so to get to be doing what I'm passionate about in a way that's helping people, I think it kind of combines all these things that I wanted in life. You know, like I'm an Enneagram 2, I'm definitely the helper. So this podcast and connecting with this community of people has been really instrumental. But on the flip side, I get to do what I've always wanted to do, which is be a storyteller, and that's been awesome.
That's fantastic. And it does, I mean, feeling like you're where you're supposed to be is a big win at any point in life. So, well, what do you think, I mean, what are the parts of your ADHD that you still struggle with?
Oh gosh,
the most?
Money. Money is terrible for me.
Is it impulsivity? Is it,
It's a big picture on money. It is the impulsivity for sure, but it's almost like not having an understanding of what money is. Like, what is $1? What is my time worth? What is my work worth? It's all of those things. And I think money and being in debt and all of the things that come with that itself is just like a load of bricks on your chest. And I've been very fortunate, like, generational wealth is real. There were very many times in my 20s where my parents picked up the pieces, and I know that that is a gift that I'm constantly repaying by making my mom my +1 to every fun thing I get invited to. But I think I have a really hard time with that. it doesn't get fixed when you have money.
Right.
It's like you can start making more money and your problems are still there. So that's a big one. Organization. When someone has a plan in place, I can stick to that. I can follow that order. It's when I'm asked to set it up for myself and trying to do too much, which I know is very hilarious to say on episode 1 of a podcast special series that is 31 episodes in 31 days. Right, exactly.
Just take on something else.
Yes. It's not even, I guess, big picture for the project stuff. It's even like day to day. There's times where I'm like, oh, I can do all of this stuff. I can do this, 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 and this. And then you're in the middle of it and you're miserable because you're stressed out and you're running late and you're trying to get all of these things done because you've overloaded yourself. And in the moment, you're like, I'm never doing this again. And then it's next Tuesday and you're in it again. And so it's cutting back some of those things. I used to be so impulsive. If I got an idea or I saw something I wanted and it was at a store across town, I would drive there. I would drop whatever I was doing and drive there. And going back to like the grief of things, I think that has played a big part of it. The impulsivity and the lack of focus, even in the pandemic, and I know I'm not alone in this, I feel like people who are neurodivergent and neurotypical probably feel the same as well. We were gifted all this time and we look back and we're like, what did I do with it?
There's nothing to show for it.
And that's the part of our brain where we're like, there's nothing to show for it, but think of all the things that you did do. We all spent more time with our families. Like my boyfriend John and I created these amazing traditions around the holidays when we couldn't see our families. Like those things wouldn't have happened had we not had that time.
Yeah, I wouldn't have got to sit in on orchestra class.
Yeah.
Ever.
Right.
So.
And so it's changing the way we speak to ourselves, which is very hard. But it's also such an important part of the process.
Right. Well, then let's go to the positive.
The positives.
Where does ADHD give you your strength?
Yeah. It is a strength. I love so many different things, and I love to do so many different things. Like everyone asks about my career path, and I have to like explain like I was really into this, and then I was really into that, and I still am really into them. But it was trying to find something that I wanted to do every single day was such a struggle. And I know I'm supposed to say on the positive side of things, so it's like it's knowing that I can still be passionate about those things and that they don't have to be as big of a part of my life.
I know what you're saying. Yeah, it's that it's still giving them the energy without the weight.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
One thing that I will say that I have changed leaps and bounds is my connection to things. So when we talk about money and we talk about the dopamine rush and the impulsivity, we don't talk about the flip side when you're trying to get your life in order and you've come to terms with the fact that these behaviors have to stop. Getting rid of this stuff brings in this whole level of shame and disappointment, and I mean, we are really brutal to ourselves. And it's the power that we attach to money and that we've spent money on this, we should keep it. And so we never make the moves that we want to. And I had this moment not too long ago where I just went closet to closet. It was like a Monday afternoon, and there was no attachment to things any longer. It was get it out of my house, I want it gone. And it was so funny, I think it was in one of the webinars we were hosting. I was talking about all of these craft items and half-finished things, and someone in the chat very kindly suggested, well, there's a website for that. You can go on this website and people will take your half-finished projects. And it's like, but that's another thing to add to my list. And right now I need it out of the house. And so getting it in a box, getting it in the car, getting it to the donation site, and not feeling sad about it, not feeling the feelings of grief of
what you've given up or not done.
Exactly. And I do think mine is very much tied to the time, energy, and money that I spent on it. Yep. And I think that a lot of people can relate to that. So just detaching from it, working on accepting the fact that that time is not something I'm going to get back. And I could sit there and ruminate on it and make myself feel terrible, which I do sometimes that does still happen. It's not just like I woke up one day and it's gone. But it does me no good. And the best part about that is knowing moving forward, working on saying yes to what I want to say yes to, and saying no and being okay saying no. A lovely human taught me a great line that I have used more frequently than I thought I would, because I think I was afraid to say it. I don't like to disappoint people. It's, I would love to help with that right now, or I would love to do that right now, but I'm at capacity. And you don't need an explanation. You know, I think we, as people pleasers, are very quick to feel like we owe everyone an explanation of why we can't do something or why it's not going to work for us. I mean, even things from someone asking you to go to dinner on Friday night to like taking on a work project at work or whatever it is, like having boundaries, standing up for yourself. And I used to equate standing up for yourself and confrontation. That was they were interlinked to me. And I laugh because we have had many conversations about emotional regulation. And like, hello, so much of my life, like not being able to communicate my feelings without getting angry. And I say getting angry, and I don't even know if I'm angry in the moment, but it's like I couldn't hold a calm conversation about something that I was passionate about. And so my voice would go up, or I would cry, and then it's like no one knew what to do, and then I would feel bad. And so it's being able to say, hey, it really hurt my feelings when you did this, or I don't like the way this was done. Can we do that again? I had this moment where I was explaining my fear of upsetting people. And the number of times that I would go into a store where salespeople would help you, whether they worked on commission or not, where I would buy whatever it was that they were selling me, knowing I would come back and return it. Because admitting in the moment that I wasn't interested or it wasn't what I was looking for, do you know how much time that is? And I'm never gonna see those people again.
Right. And you're just giving them
Yeah.
both times.
Yes. And so it's really this moment of like acknowledging, like raising yourself up, knowing what your weaknesses are. I mean, I have a ton of weaknesses. They're very present in everyday life. They're very present in the podcast. And I think being open and honest about them is like the only way to move forward. And yeah, you know, like I said, I think the last year and a half, it's the best year and a half of my life, because I'm finally who I thought I was in my 20s, who I pretended to be in my 20s. You know, I was this really confident, like the quote unquote cool girl. I didn't let anything bother me. I was go with the flow, which none of that was true. Like that I ever described myself as go with the flow is pretty comical. So
That's really funny. Well, so you touched on something there that I think a lot of people, or it's interesting to me, I'll put it that way. Just getting medication, to me, is not enough.
No.
Right? This is something I've learned now, having started treatment, that it's not a magic key that suddenly my ADHD is magically cured.
right.
And I'm just interested, I mean, part of, I think, what you're talking about is that growth that a lot of people that are wondering if they have ADHD, or they might know they have ADHD, they may not have put that work in. I know I didn't for a long time. So I'm just wondering how much does addressing it beyond medication mean to you?
Oh, it's the only way forward, truly, because you're addressing the big picture. Medication is one of the tools. Like for me, truthfully, I had an incident not too long ago where I went down to stay with my mom for the night and I forgot my medicine. And it was not pretty. It was not pretty in part because it's a part of my routine. My brain felt foggy. I felt very much like I had for almost 35 years. But I also think it was my brain playing tricks on me that I didn't have this. I had 4 interviews that day for the podcast lined up. So it was very intensive, very hyper-focused on these things. And I got done and I was exhausted. And it was such a crash course in understanding the power of the medicine. But at the end of the day, what has really helped change my routine and change my patterns is therapy. I have an amazing therapist. Some days we come in and I talk about my feelings, and some days we make lists. Like, we have a running to-do list, and every week we go through it. She takes things off of it. It's this level of accountability that comes from somebody who really just wants to see me succeed. And it was great to do that first, because now I'm feeling more comfortable asking for that support from other people in life, from friends, from my partner, from my mom and my sisters, and getting to that level of feeling comfortable saying, like, hey, this is how I work best, or this is what I need from you, or this is not working for me. Can we reevaluate this? Like, being comfortable asking for that. And then I had this moment, and I think it's so funny, is because we really like quantitative results when it comes to how well we're doing at something. Right. Qualitative is just too hard for us to see. But not too long ago, I had this moment where I was like, God, I am feeling great. I'm sleeping well. Everything is, I'm feeling great. And I was kind of going through the things in my head. Well, I've been doing this, and I've been doing that, and I take my medicine, and I'm going to therapy, and I've been eating better. And then there was this moment where I was like, and you've been working out regularly 3 to 7 times a week. There is no standard for me because of my line of work. But it's been going on for like 3 years. And it's not like I got a notification like, hey, you've improved your health. It doesn't happen. It's not like that. And I kind of think we're always waiting for that. I've never had issues with my blood pressure or anything like that. So when I go into the doctor, they're always like, yeah, you're good. And so it wasn't until I sat down and I had this moment of like, no, I'm feeling as good as I am because I'm doing all of the things that they said. Right. Isn't it crazy to think? They say if you work out regularly, and for everybody that looks differently, but you move your body on a consistent basis, it's likely you'll feel better.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Yeah, I know. I know. So, what are the things what are some of the tips you have when you're noticing ADHD in your day that you turn to that help you cope with it?
So it's really interesting because I'm really excited to kind of get back into a normal routine once we get Refocused Together launched, because the conversations that I've had with these people, so many different stories with ADHD, I've learned so many amazing tips and tricks that are working for them that I can't wait to go back and implement into my own routine, that I can see are things that I haven't been doing. The biggest being, and I know we're going to talk about what I do that's good, but I think the biggest thing is that I leave my schedule too open for other people. And so I was talking to somebody and they were like, no, I only take meetings on Monday, or I only take meetings between 10 and noon. And I was like, really? You're that? And they were like, yeah, if they want to meet with me, they can meet with me then, or they can just ask for a different time. And yes, I'm willing sometimes to accommodate, but this is how I work best. Right. So I'm super excited, very geeky, to get back and set a routine and try to stick to it, because I've just not had that. Also, on the flip side of, I tried to implement that over the summer, which it was the last week of August, and I was like, maybe summer was not the best time to establish a new routine.
Probably not.
What has worked for me is notes, is setting timers, is having reminders, is turning off notifications to all of the shiny objects on my phone. I don't get notifications for any social media. I don't get any notifications for email unless it's a specified sender. I say to people, if you are trying to get a hold of me, this is the best way to do it, because I am blocking the rest of it out. And then I've actually started adding in meditation when I need it. So every once in a while, that midday exhaustion that I dealt with for almost 35 years, that feeling at 2 or 3 or 4, depending on how busy my morning's been and how on I've had to be, I want to go to bed. I want to crawl into bed. If the weather's crummy, I want to crawl into bed. And what I've started doing instead is I pull out my sad light, or I go out on the deck if it's sunny, and I turn on like a 20-minute breathing exercise. I just go to YouTube and I find something, and it's just that 20 minutes of breathing and being with my thoughts. And it's kind of scary how, like, if it were a video game, that would be like the moment when like all the energy comes back up and I like rise from the dead and I'm like, all right, what are we doing? But it's acknowledging and setting that time aside for yourself and giving yourself grace. I used to beat myself up if I scheduled something and I was like, I'm too tired. And being aware of how we feel and when we work at our best is really it's such a game changer.
That's great. I love that.
Well, you love it because I made the video game analogy.
Well, yeah, and I'm like, that power up move is potent.
Yes.
All right, well then last thing, what do you want people to know about ADHD that you feel like a lot of people either misunderstand or it just doesn't make sense to them?
It's the complexity. And I truly think when I go back to the beginning of thinking about telling 31 stories is telling as many different stories as possible, because everyone's story when they were diagnosed is different, but how it shows up in life is different. And we don't talk enough about the comorbidities that come with a diagnosis like ADHD. I can explain to my friends, I can go back to scenarios where I didn't behave my best, or I was upset about something and I couldn't quite figure out why, and now I know, and I can explain to them like, hey, I know that this doesn't make sense to you, or maybe when I say it, it sounds really strange, but this is where my brain went. Especially for stuff like rejection sensitive dysphoria. I'm not at the point where I'm saying ADHD is my superpower. There are obviously things like producing 31 podcasts in 31 days that are very ADHD, and I can say like, yes, being creative and being outside the box, like, and thinking that way is amazing. But ADHD and some of the side effects of it have been incredibly destructive in my life. They've pushed me out of jobs, they've pushed me out of relationships, they've pushed me out of things I worked incredibly hard to get to, and then you get there and you feel like you don't belong and you feel like everyone is against you. And it's the stories we tell ourselves. And what I love about that phrase is I say that phrase to dear friends who are neurotypical, and they can relate in that sense. Yes. Because every single person has walked into a room or has not been invited to something or has, had something happen where they've internalized it to make them think it's all about them, that they're the bad egg, or they're the reason that happened, or there's so many ways to go with it. But when you start to think about like why your brain is doing what it's doing and the stories that you're telling yourself, it's incredibly powerful. And I think it's really interesting getting this later in life diagnosis, because I do think when I was a kid, and I hate admitting this, but I do think that the children who fit into that category of having, at the time, Adhd and would be getting extra help or were loud and would get kicked out of the classroom, like, they got labeled as, and I'm going to say this word, they got labeled as dumb. They were the dumb kids. And it's so disheartening to say that and to know that that was such a common misconception. And I do think it's that outdated stereotype that ADHD is tied to intelligence and what you're capable of accomplishing that holds a lot of people back from talking about their own ADHD. And so telling all of these stories, telling my story, talking to people like Zach and Dr. Duttler about their experiences with their own ADHD, and just highlighting how prominent it is. When we look at psychology and when ADHD was first talked about, like, it's very new. This is not I was at stuff last week where I still heard people referring to it as ADD. So it's not even as commonly known yet that it's called ADHD, and there's 3 different types, and here's where they fall in, and how people get diagnosed and given a specific diagnosis. And That to me is like the most important part, is one, changing the stereotype, and two, making some of the other things that are a little lesser known, like rejection sensitivity dysphoria and rumination. Like, let's go back to Mrs. O'Neill's class in 5th grade and talk about how much time I wasted sitting in that rocking chair, just rocking away. It's like, got me nowhere. Got me nowhere. It just made me feel terrible about myself. But again, it was the story that my brain was telling me, and it was so incredibly powerful. And so just sharing some of those things. And I hope, the more stories we tell and the more people who see themselves in those stories and start to get the answers that they've been looking for, that's incredibly powerful. And the last thing that I'd like to kind of add in is getting a diagnosis doesn't mean that you have to change your life.
No.
It's giving you like a manual to your brain, in a sense. It's just giving you a better understanding. It doesn't mean you have to start taking medicine or start therapy. You don't have to tell anyone, but it opens up those opportunities.
Yeah, and just being able to kind of recontextualize yourself, it's huge. Well, I just want to thank you from the team at ADHD Online as we kick this off, because, we're so excited to bring these stories forward. And I think part of our mission in putting the faces of ADHD out there is to break through just kind of some of the symptoms and the common misconceptions that people have. So we were thrilled when you came with this idea. We continue to love what you're doing, and we just can't wait to get all these stories out there and see where it leads. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me come into that meeting, guns a-blazing, and roll off that pitch, and not one person tried to talk me out of it, which is maybe a...
I remember us chatting, and we were like, 31 days, all right.
Couldn't have been February, right?
No, well, and we were like, but that's just kind of how we roll.
Yes.
So it seems to fit.
It's fitting. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you, Boz.